Hello, and welcome to Health and Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we take a dive into the health and fitness where we're learn overcome adversity to pick fact versus fiction and see health and fitness in a whole new light. Welcome, everybody, to today's episode. I hope you've been enjoying our quick tip episodes. We're quite a few in now, and I know you guys are enjoying it because I see that you're all watching it, you're all gathering some of it. If there's any burning questions that you have that you want me to answer, please feel free to reach out. Email will be in the show notes, healthfitnessredefinedpodcast@gmail.com. I'd be happy to take any questions, do a little deep dive into them. So far, my favorite's the one on creatine. I know that was supposed to be a quick tip, but I went like 11 minutes on that one because it was definitely an interesting topic to really talk about. But highly recommend you guys look at that. Today's episode, we're going to introduce somebody that's going to talk about just an interesting topic. And I know just by looking at the show header, you're like, yeah, that sounds like an interesting topic. I have a lot of questions about it. It's something I've heard both ends of the spectrum about. So I think it'd be really curious. I think it's something different to talk about. So without further ado, let's welcome to the show, Frank Rich. Frank, it's a pleasure.
Anthony, grateful to be here, brother. Thank you for having me on.
I'm excited to have you on. I appreciate you doing this. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you do?
Yeah, well, I'm the CEO and founder of Rebuilt Recovery. Our company is dedicated to helping men become better men by quitting porn and rebuilding their lives. I'm also the host of the Superhuman Life podcast, where we host a weekly interview style show, very similar to this, been at it right about the same time. So I started that in July of 2019. And that's to, bring awareness, first, number one, to, the dangers of pornography addiction, and then provide tips and strategies to help the men overcome it. But as this show has evolved over the last 3 years, it's really become, a hub and source for men's personal growth and development. So we focus on conversations around the 5 key areas of life, which I believe are faith, fitness, finance, family, and freedom. But I spend the majority of my time working, one-on-one and group style coaching with men that are struggling with a pornography addiction.
It's so interesting. And I kind of just want to start there. Like, what is considered a pornography addiction? So you want to talk to us about the definition real quick?
Yeah, that's a great way to start the conversation here, Anthony. And when I think when it comes to definitions and terms, a lot of people say things without really having any substance of what they're actually saying. So you had mentioned both in our pre-intro and then even in the intro here, is like you've kind of heard both sides of this. Is it a thing? Is it not a thing? For me, I go to the experts when I'm looking for definitions. So I had the honor of having Dr. Anna Lemke, who is the head of Stanford's addiction department for the last 20 plus years. She's the author of the best-selling book, Dopamine Nation. So this is a woman that has spent her life both researching and working in the field. So she's a psychiatrist. So she sees patients still to this day in sex addiction and specifically pornography addiction. And I asked her, I said, Anna, what is your definition of addiction? And that's the one that I've defaulted to with my understanding, and it's what I try to shape all of our work around. Dr. Anna Lemke defines addiction as the continued or repeated use of substance and or behavior despite negative consequences to self and or others. So repeated use of substance and or behavior. So pornography addiction would be the continued use of pornography despite there being negative consequences to yourself and or others in your life.
Interesting. So I'm just going to kind of relate this to, I think, alcohol, because that's the easiest for a lot of people to understand of what is alcoholism compared to what is casually drinking. And I want you to use that analogy. So if I'm sitting down having a beer with a bunch of friends and then not really doing much once in a while, like for me, for example, I drink 3 beers a week, and that's like a heavy week for me. But it doesn't mean I'm addicted to alcohol, because at any given point I could be like, I don't want one. I don't feel like I need the need to having it. Whereas alcoholism is that need to always have that beer, that struggle that even for those that have one, now they need to have 5 more afterwards because they can't put it down once they have one. So can you relate that same definition over to pornography addiction?
No, because I would look at it a whole lot differently, right? I think if that person that drinks 3 beers, once a week or once a month spirals out of control in that one day and it creates a destructive pattern within their life, that has negative consequences to either themselves and or others, then that still would be maybe not in the classical terms an alcoholic, but in my eyes, if there's something that you're doing that is producing negative outcomes or negative consequences in your life. So you may only look at pornography once every 6 months, but if at that point it causes a massive blow up argument in your relationship, if it causes guilt and shame even within you, and I think that's where a lot of this is coming, is like the internal consequences that men are struggling with. It's like, yeah, I know every guy is doing this, but when I seek it out, I don't feel good about what I'm doing. Are you sitting there while you're drinking? Are you enjoying the conversation, which a lot of people do? So I don't think it's a matter of how frequent or how often. It's what is the impact. It's what's the outcome of the behavior or substance that you're involving in.
So if it's causing, just want to make sure I hear you right. If it's causing a negative type of consequence in your life, then it's considered an addiction, regardless about how often it's done.
And yeah, I mean, I think we're too caught up on addiction. I'm not trying to label anybody good or
No, of
bad
course,
with
yeah.
an addiction.
But
There's
starting with
something
the
that
definition
you're
helps us
doing. I mean, you could
broad.
be addicted. You could be addicted to health and fitness, right? I mean, you could be going 4 or 5 days a week, but if it's the only thing that you do, if it's absorbing your life. I battled with this. You know, I was a competitive bodybuilder for almost 10 years, and I see it a lot in that part of the fitness space. It's like, yeah, these people are doing an activity that for many is producing good outcomes, but if they're so absorbed with it, that would be an addiction. So I don't think an addiction always needs to be like a negative label. It's a recognition of, hey, does something have a grip on us more than we're actually allowing to see? So I don't think it's a matter of how often. I think it's what is it producing in your life.
I gotcha. So what is it producing? What kind of the outcome it's coming from it? Because I do see the health and fitness side of it too. I mean, when you start working at 100 gyms, you realize that there's people that are actually addicted to bodybuilding, addicted to fitness, and work out. I no joke, 3 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah. I know
Like
a lot
that's
of people
not
still in my life
sustainable.
that are like that. Yeah.
And you said you were a bodybuilder. So was that kind of how this all started? Did you realize at that point that you were working out too much that led to, how did you get into the whole porn addiction side? Just kind of walk me through it. Give us your backstory on it.
Yeah, I mean, in a short and condensed version. So I'm 39. You know, for a little bit of context, I was introduced to pornography at a very, very young age. And truthfully, Anthony, it wasn't something that I was even aware of. I knew that I had a problem through my 20s, right? Like my behavior, my use, my consumption of pornography was probably abnormal. But I think I fell into the category where a lot of men, oh, this is just something that every guy does, right? Like I've never really had a conversation around it. I never really was brought to light like some of the negative consequences. So for me, no, it wasn't, you know, I recognized that I was addicted to bodybuilding and then I started down this path. For me, I'd reached a point in my mid 30s, you know, I'd accomplished quite a bit, you know, in the bodybuilding space, in the business space, socially. Like from the outside, I looked like I had an amazing life. Many people would be like, yeah, that's the key, you know, key signals of success. But why was I so empty? Why was I so, you know, dark inside? So I started to really evaluate my life at around 34, 35 years old. And I realized that there was this behavior that had been with me since I was a child and I never really looked at it. So I started to try to get a deeper understanding of what was actually happening to my brain. So I stumbled across some great TED Talks, a book called Your Brain on Porn by Gary Wilson, which really opened my eyes to the negative effects of really putting this drug, you know, internet streaming pornography. The way that I see it is a drug that we put in our brain. So when I recognized what I was doing and the impacts that it was having, I just made a choice. And I was like, this serves me in no way at all. And somebody that had chased high performance, somebody that had spent their life in personal development, like I was always looking for that 1-2% lever that I could pull to get me to that next phase in life. And for me, it was realizing that pornography wasn't doing me any good and it was probably holding me back in a lot of ways. That I made a choice on February 14th of 2019. And the next couple of months, you know, my life really began to change. And that led me to wanting to share that with others. And that was the genesis of the podcast. And then 6 months, you know, into the podcast, like all the coaching that I'm doing today was never anything that I set out to do. It was simply a byproduct of me having very intentional conversations on the podcast and men reaching out to me saying, Frank, we love what you're doing, but can you help us? We're stuck. So originally, I wanted to share what was going on in my life, and that led to the podcast, and then the coaching and rebuilt recovery and everything that we've built today has kind of birthed out of that as a need.
Great backstory, man. It's awesome. You kind of got yourself picked up your bootstraps and you stumbled into something you didn't think you were going to be. And that's usually kind of how life takes us happenstance, because we start one direction and we end up in a totally another because we find a void that needs to be filled, and we've kind of filled that void. So that's awesome. You're doing that.
Yeah. And I think that's, I think if you look at successful people, there's going to be patterns, in their life that follow that same trajectory, right? Even with bodybuilding, even my first kind of career in health and fitness, I still run a fitness company here to this day. That was a byproduct of me, having some insecurities as a boy, like not feeling comfortable in my own skin. So that led me to, pursuing the gym. And then, just through, hard work and effort, I saw the byproduct of putting in the work. And I saw what happens when you make a plan, set a goal, delay gratification, and be willing to put in the work. My body transformed very, very quickly. And then that led into some other success in the corporate world. That led into success in entrepreneurship. So the principles for success, or what it takes to succeed, whether in building a body, building a business, or overcoming pornography addiction, they are universal. I believe that. So if you understand what it takes to succeed, you can simply direct it intentionally in a given path. And I think that's why I've been able to, in a very short amount of time, step into this field that I had no clue what I was doing 3 years ago, and reach the level of success that we have here today.
Yeah, it's totally true. You kind of just jump into it and figure it out as you go along. Yeah. We both were in that same boat. So totally understand.
It's funny. No, I'm sorry. So true. I was having a conversation with my mom yesterday, and she just asked me how things are going, business, and we're launching a new program here in a couple weeks. And I was like, things are going amazing. Like, it's the best it's ever been. Like, I have no clue what the hell I'm doing, but I like it this way. And I think that, that's what makes an entrepreneur, right? It's like the guy that jumps out of the airplane and builds a parachute on the way down.
Yes. I want to go over the plan, but I think before we go over the plan, I think a lot of people, just including myself on this, like, what are the harmful factors of pornography addiction? I never listened to that TED Talk. If you don't mind, just repeat the name one more time so we have it. But just why is it bad?
It's a big question.
Yeah, it is a big question.
Yeah, well, the book that I was referencing, and there's some great ones out there, but I think for most people, Your Brain on Porn by Gary Wilson would be a great resource to look into. He also did a talk called The Great Porn Experiment. So when you mentioned that the audience here is about 20 to 35. I don't know if that would be classified as Generation Z. I'm not too coined with those terms there, but we have a lot of young men that are growing into manhood, into adulthood now, and they're the first generation that has had the internet and had smartphones with them really since they were children. For me, seeing pornography when I was a kid, like, we had to put in some work. We had to steal it from our dad. We had to steal it from a convenience store. We had to be lucky to find something out in the woods. You're giggling, but this is actually, this is a major.
We're about the same
here.
age. I'm laughing because it's true.
But so with the young men here today, you put a smartphone in a young boy's hands at 10, 11 years old. And in fact, the average age of exposure to pornography is 11 years old. Well, that boy has no education on pornography. His brain isn't anywhere developed. He's going to see these images, which are going to create a supernormal stimulus. So internet pornography creates a hit of dopamine that you will not be able to produce it in the natural world. You can get it from hardcore drugs, but the supernormal stimulus effects. So this creates new baselines. So then he begins to seek these things out. But what ends up happening here, though, is this boy, by the ages of 18, 20 years old, when he would maybe be getting into intimate relationships, he's had 1,000 sexual releases prior to ever actually engaging in an intimate act. Well, what fires together wires together. So he's trained and conditioned his brain that sexual release, sexual pleasure is done from a spectator, right? I'm sitting in a voyeurist type of place where I'm watching other people engage in an act, and that's what produces a sexual release for me. So I think for young people out there, It's warping and it's hijacking what real deep intimacy and what real sexuality is. And you can't disconnect it as your brain is developing. If that's what you're training your body to do, this is why we're seeing a massive spike in erectile dysfunction, right? The average age or the average testosterone of men in their 20s and 30s right now is equivalent to what it was in, men in their 60s just 30, 40 years ago. I hear from dozens of young men in their 20s every single week that suffer with a term PIED, porn-induced erectile dysfunction, because they've trained and conditioned themselves that if they're going to have an erection and they're going to have a sexual release, they should be sitting in a voyeurist, consuming type of position as opposed to being engaged in it. So I think the biggest issue here is literally what it's doing to the young minds and hearts and souls of our young men. Now we could get into, how it causes your brain to objectify people, how it hijacks your motivation, how it, really steals any joy and meaning out of life. That's all tied to the dopamine center. But it comes back to just these super normal stimuluses. So we're not meant to sit here and consume an infinite amount of naked bodies. Like that's not what the human body and brain was wired or created for. There's a novelty component. We want to seek that out, but we're not created to be able to handle it. So there's a lot to that question, but I think the biggest one is just what it's doing to, like I said, the minds, hearts, and souls of our young men.
Interesting. So we're relating it to dopamine releases that you'd get from that kind of experience, which is the same thing. Just going back to all my classes I took on drugs, like meth, for example. The reason meth is the most addictive drug out there is because of the amount of dopamine it releases upon having. And it's something that no matter how hard you try, what you do in your life, what accomplishments you get, you will never hit that same level of dopamine release. So you get depressed from it. And then that same amount of meth isn't going to cause that same amount of dopamine release. So now you need to have more the next time in order to get is that relatable example?
100%. That's a desensitization effect, right? The problem, what makes meth different is you don't have a free meth dealer sitting in your pocket, pinging you every once in a while, like, hey, come look at me. There's it's called the AAA recipe. So 3 reasons why pornography addiction is more dangerous and destructive than even meth or cocaine or any of these hardcore drugs. And number 1 is you have the accessibility component, right? The fact that it literally, like, within the next half hour, I could sit here and I consume as much free pornography as I possibly wanted, either from my computer or from my screen. Once again, we're giving this to our children. We're saying, here's a drug dealer for you. Now go try and figure out the world. So you have the accessibility component. There's the anonymity component, right? The fact that it's completely anonymous. You can sit in your home, never have to leave. If you're struggling with drugs or alcohol, people are going to know most often. Like, you're going to have to engage with other people either to get them, or they're going to begin to see a deterioration in your exterior of how you actually look and present yourself. So it's completely anonymous. Second thing is it's always accessible. Literally, like, you have a drug dealer in your pocket 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's not the case with any other type of addiction. And then you have the affordability component as well, which obviously ties to the accessibility. The fact that you don't need to pay. I mean, internet streaming pornography is free, an infinite amount. I mean, you could sit here for the next 160 years on any one of these tube sites and not be able to consume all the pornography that is on there. So yeah, but what you mentioned there, the desensitization thing, where it's like you need more and more of the same drug to produce the same results. That's with any addiction. And that's where you hear young men, it's like, I have no clue how I even ended up watching some of these things that I'm into.
Interesting. And is this the same as related to, let's go back to when we were young. I'm talking like magazines. Is it the same kind of effect that you're going to have with that magazine style before the internet even came out? Is it the same as a man masturbating without pornography? What's the difference there?
Well, no, I wouldn't say it's the same, right? Because like a magazine is number one, it's a handful of images, with a porn site, like there's an infinite amount of pornography. So if this one isn't getting the job done, well, I'm going to seek the next one out. I'm going to seek the next one out. I'm going to seek the next one out. And this creates a problem because dopamine has a component tied to motivation and the seeking of something. Like motivation is a chemical that is designed to release when we're in the pursuit of our goals. So constantly jumping from video to video in anticipation of the next big one is what creates the addiction, because it's like every new video creates a small little drip. It's like, oh, this one's going to be the one. This one's going to be the one. Once you're done with the magazine, you're done with the you're done with the magazine. I would also say that there's obviously an effect with like the production of many of these videos, right? Like they're produced in a way to understand how the brain works and to understand that it's going to get hijacked. We have to realize, like, if something is free, we are the product. Social media is free to every single person that uses it because they're monetizing your eyeballs. Same logic applies to pornography. These sites will give it to you for free because they understand how the brain works and they understand how to keep you locked in long enough so that then they can sell your data to their advertisers. So no, I wouldn't say it's anywhere near the same as magazines or even imagination.
Right. So it's more, and just for point of clarity, it's more of the actual internet side of it, video streaming side of it, because it keeps you on. It gives you a different perspective than it is itself masturbating on your own or with a magazine. That's not the issue. The issue is actually the videos and the way that these porn sites are monetizing.
It depends on who you're talking to, right? Like our work is centered around helping men overcome pornography addiction. Are there people in the world that are addicted to masturbation? 100%. Are there people in the world that are addicted to, was pornography addiction a thing before the rise of the internet? 100%. So it's not this thing. It's the conversation that you and I have been having is centered around internet streaming pornography.
Gotcha.
But yeah, you can have a guy that's addicted to masturbation. You can have a guy, you could be addicted to anything because once again, it's the continued or repeated use of substance and or behavior despite a negative consequences to self and or others. So drinking San Pellegrino water could be an addiction if there's a negative effect that it produces within my life. So it's not a and this or that conversation. It's the one that we're having is centered around the internet.
Awesome, man. I really want to ask you one question. Then we're going to go to our sponsor. Then I'm going to dive into your plan. And the question is, do you see women reaching out?
I do. Not at the same level. And that's just because women's brains are wired differently. But there are women that struggle with it. It's not as big of a problem. And I think we're going to begin to see more of a rise in that because I think younger women are getting introduced to it at a younger age. But I mentioned Anna Lemke at the beginning of this, right? The Stanford professor. She opens up her book where she talks about her own struggles with, I believe they were the Twilight novels. So erotica novels or that whole series or style of books would be classified by many as the women's pornography. So men are visually stimulated. There's a part of our brain that responds to visual stimulation. This is obviously, red lipsticks and all these things why women wear makeup, right? Like this is a byproduct of our male wiring. So women, it's not that they don't have that, it's not as deep wired in them, but there's a creativity component to them. So reading through some literature, reading through a novel, and then allowing their imagination is how their brain is wired. So I would say more women probably struggle with that, but yeah, I do hear from young women occasionally that are struggling with it.
Awesome. And I want to really dive into your plan on the flip side of this. We're just going to take a quick break from a word from our sponsor, guys. And then we're going to talk about his plan about how he kind of gets it from one help to the other and hopefully to take away something from this episode. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. For us, we know what it's like to feel unhealthy, depressed, and downright defeated. We want to show others there is a right way. And through fitness, you could do anything you set your mind to. Fitness can give you that motivation, confidence, energy you need to bridge that mental gap and prevent you from missing important life events. We understand it's about feeling better, living longer, and being good examples for our kids. We understand this because we live it. And for us, that's the redefined difference. Hey, everybody, and welcome back. We have Frank here. We're talking all about porn addiction. We're going to dive into how you can help kind of get yourself over this. What are his steps? What are the things he works on? So, Frank, kind of take us through. If I was a client, I'm reaching out and they said, hey, Frank, this is something I'm struggling with. How would you help work with me to get over this? And what's something our listeners can do from home?
Yeah, well, I mean, oftentimes by the time that they're reaching out to me, they may have gone through some process like this, but we're still going to bring it back to this. Is you must actually accept and acknowledge like that there is a problem within your life. I mean, the first part of this conversation was us trying to kind of get to the root of what is addiction and defining it, and how does a pornography addiction maybe show up in your life. If you're going to fully break through and kind of transcend that behavior in your life, you must actually admit and recognize the depth of the problem. And this is, very similar to what you would do like in the traditional 12 steps, right? 12 step is going to be, you kind of surrender. What I don't really follow there is like, I don't think that every day you need to admit and identify yourself as an addict. We start from recognizing that there's a behavior in our life that we are not proud about, we're willing to change, but then we actually commit to changing that. So the first step would just be to acknowledge and admit that there's a problem in your life. Step two would then be to actually commit, like decide that you're willing to do whatever it takes to get this out of your life. Sounds like, oh yeah, of course people, of course I'm going to do that. But a true decision, when it's been something that's been a part of your life for a very long time, is where most men struggle. And then, we have a 7-step book that we wrote. The next one is, fast, make a plan for your life, get in support, get accountability, build belief in yourself. But I think the big two is the recognition and acceptance of the problem within your life, and then the true commitment that you're willing to do whatever it takes.
What are some things that people can do to help commit, like help them self-commit? Would it be like, as an example, putting something on a wall as a reminder, or what are some things you recommend to people to really truly give in and commit to it?
Yeah, get in support, get with people. Probably the third step there would be to have a conversation with somebody. This is not something you're going to want to do all on your own. So getting in the right type of community, whether that's a support group, whether that's, reaching out to a pastor, whether it's reaching out to a therapist or a coach, somebody that you can entrust in, that wants the best for you, isn't going to come from a place of judgment, though, when you begin to actually share what's going on, and build a regular cadence where you have weekly conversations with this individual about what's going well, about what's going on inside of you, about what you're struggling with. So get that help and support that you're going to need. Yeah, writing things on your wall is great. I would say, really begin to build structure in your life, though. Like if you're somebody that doesn't really have a morning routine, start building routines in your day. If you don't have an eating routine, because oftentimes, I hear from men, it's like, I seeked out pornography when I was bored. I did this when I was bored and lonely. So if it creates structure and organization, it's a classic line from Jocko Willink, right? Structure equals freedom. If we're seeking freedom from a pornography addiction, then we must inject like a significant amount of structure into our day. Because how do you want to guarantee you don't look at pornography tomorrow? Make a plan from the time you wake up till the time that you go to sleep, where your day is filled with high priority activities, and you won't fall into low pleasure seeking activities.
Which just in general, and I'm just going to say this, that's huge, because I see this a lot of times with people trying to be successful, whether they're entrepreneurs or trying to lose weight or whatever it may be. We take these low level activities and put them over these high engaging activities that really would help propel us to the next step. And a huge example I used on a previous episode was, instead of saying that sitting in front of TV with your significant other is bonding time, it doesn't do much for you. Why not instead go for a walk with your significant other, still get that bonding time, still get the exercise together, and start promoting an extra healthy habit for the both of you? And that's why I love that, because it's super relatable in almost every different aspect of somebody's life. It's engaged in these high level activities and help yourself propel that way.
Yeah, and that's just, it's just seconding what I said, at the beginning here, right? Like when you understand the universal principles for success in any area of your life, it's very easy to see the patterns and how you can direct them to overcoming a pornography addiction, getting in shape, building businesses. So I do some business coaching on the side as well. I'm part of a fitness business mastermind where we help online fitness coaches really launch, grow, and scale their businesses. And what's interesting here, Anthony, is a lot of times the conversation I'm having with up and coming entrepreneurs is the same exact conversations that I'm having with the men inside of our Rebuild Recovery coaching program. It's like they struggle with getting things done. They struggle with self-belief. They struggle with confidence. They struggle with structure, organization within their days. So yeah, you're just hitting on something that is so key there, right? It's like when you understand success it's a series of small daily actions repeated and compounded over time, then you could build strategic plans to build a business, to build a body, to overcome addiction, to create meaningful relationships, to become a better community service member, whatever the case may be. And this is why when you ask me what we do, we help men become better men by quitting porn first and rebuilding their lives. Like, we're not only focusing on pornography, we're focusing on the man, building him up so that he no longer has the need to run to a pleasure-seeking outlet like this. It's really reshaping the man from a holistic perspective.
I would love for you to kind of share some examples of things that clients that have gone through your program have helped achieve after coming out of it. If you have any offhand, I don't know to prep this for you, but if you got any cool stories about different success tactics, you don't have to use names, obviously, just people and how it helped them and what they did throughout the program.
Yeah, man. I mean, we've had so many, right? I mean, I had one, one individual in general. This was a father. So he was a father of two young kids. I think they were 3 and maybe 8 months old. He went through our 4-month group coaching program, and in the exit interview with him, he thanked me because he told me he felt like he had sex with his wife for the first time during our program.
Wow.
So think about what he meant when he said that. So I think that's something really deep, and that's one I always like to share. We had another young man who at the time was engaged to his fiance, now wife, was in med school at the time, and just didn't want to take this into his career and into his marriage. So he came to us about 5 months out from the wedding. We have a 4-month program. So I got to work with him almost up until the day of their wedding, which was amazing, beautiful. They streamed it online, beautiful pictures. What he ended up doing, though, because he had so much going on in his life, right? He's in med school. He's taking our program. He's working on planning a wedding. Like, he had to really learn to optimize like his time and scheduling, and like mastered the structure. Midway through the program, though, he realized, like, because we had this service component where you have to like reach out and help some people. He's like, Frank, I can't get to a community center. And number one was during COVID. He's like, most things are locked down. He's like, can I maybe help some med school students with their scheduling and with their time management? I said, absolutely. What that turned into an actual course and program that now he sells online to people that are going through med school to help them, manage and really optimize their time management. So he, while going to med school, while preparing for a wedding, while overcoming pornography addiction, built and launched a successful online coaching business where he helps med school students manage their time. And then obviously we've had the relationships that have been built outside of, the community. That's one big thing we're big on, is the community of the men that we work with and serve. So just, these guys are turning into best friends. They're taking trips together. They're getting together on the weekends and going out and breaking bread and shooting guns together, having deep, meaningful conversations about life. So yeah, there's a lot of them, but I think those two are two that always kind of come up, because to hear a father say, I had sex for the first time with my wife, during your program meant a lot to me. And then obviously the successful business launch was something big, because I love helping entrepreneurs at the same time.
Yeah, it's being present. And I think that is the first example, the first guy. It's being present in a moment and appreciating where you are, and just not taking this instant gratification. This is going to sound corny as shit, but I'm going to add this into your, maybe you do this, maybe you don't, but this is one of my favorite things to help with instant gratification is I garden, because nothing teaches you how to appreciate things in the long time than watching a plant grow from a seed, nurturing it through the entire season to get maybe a couple of vegetables before the deer eat the rest of it. So it's that we really just takes, you say, hey, things take time to grow. I have to take care of this. I have to watch it. I have to feed it. I have to water it. And over time, I'll eventually reap what I sow, literally. But it takes months. I can't just go click, 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 and it's done. And it teaches you business. It teaches you just things in life and being in the moment of where you are and enjoying the experience.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Anthony. I never thought about gardening that way. It's funny. I actually have a garden. I moved a little bit north of Tampa during the summer here in July, and in the home that I'm living in now, like she literally has a pre-built like wooden garden. It's just been weeds growing out of it. Now it's kind of got me thinking like maybe I need to get into some gardening here. That was really well stated, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. And Frank, I'm going to ask you the final two questions I ask everybody. The first one is, if you were to summarize this episode in 1 or 2 sentences, what would be your take-home message? Tough one.
Yeah, man. We hit on a lot of things, man. Pornography addiction is a real thing. It's very new, and we're in the beginning stages of really understanding it. So come into the conversation with an open mind and open heart, and understand that nobody is judging you for anything that you're doing. If you are consuming pornography, we're just here to have a conversation about what is actually taking place, from literally being in the trenches with people. Like everything I talk about is things that are brought to me. These are not concepts and theories. Like this is real world stuff. So I know it's more than 2 sentences, but hopefully that was succinct enough.
It's all good. And then the second question, which is the easiest one of all, how can people find you, get a hold of you? Give us all that stuff.
Yeah. Best place to connect with me personally is on Instagram. It's at Coach Frank Rich. Check out the podcast. You know, we're across all platforms. That's at The Superhuman Life. And if you're interested in more of maybe kind of long form topics on pornography and recovery, check out our YouTube channel also at Coach Frank Rich.
I love it. And thank you guys for joining us on this week's episode of Health and Fitness Redefined. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button and join us next week as we dive deeper into this ever-changing field. And remember, fitness is medicine. Until next time.